Welcome back to the Lance Wallnau Show. We're going to be giving you the prophetic news and views update on what's going on around the world. To everybody's surprise, there's this mobilization of youth. Remember this, the left wing, the progressives, they are mobilizers, and they will constantly, from the NFL to the Oscars to the war, any kind of award, just politics invades everything if you're on the extreme left, because it's all about the issue of power and the acquisition of power. So I looked at this march that was going on based on the shooting that took place in Florida. And I made the statement that if the left was really concerned about gun violence, I don't know why they don't take a look at doing this in Chicago, where they have 648 homicides in the last year. But they chose to make this incident in Florida a flashpoint for the fictitious, I'm going to say, mobilization of youth, because this is the problem with the left. The teachers' unions and the schools and the education system, wherever the left goes, it mobilizes almost like a strike force. So the teachers are helping to facilitate the students to take the time off. You'll notice that if there was any students who wanted to do a March for Life type thing, the schools would shut down on them right away. But this is going to be like a mobilization against the NRA. And the argument is, stop the NRA. So the NRA is the issue. Now, the facts are, out of this big march that we heard about that was going on in Washington, it was actually not 900,000, not 500,000. It was 250,000 people is what is estimated. And here's the data that you need to know. Only 20% of it was actually youth. How many 13 to 16-year-olds do you think have credit cards, are going to book a flight in a hotel and get together with their friends and have these posters? Do these posters look to you like they were put together by students, on their way to Washington? I think these posters look like they were done out of the print shop of the left, the progressive left brand marketing machinery. And the obvious thing to me is, do you see the youth in the picture? No, you see grandmas, against violence. You know why? Because out of the 250,000 people that showed up for this protest, only 15 to 20% actually were youth. So this is supposed to be branded as the great millennial uprising, and President Obama is saying, yes, this is a good thing. Even the Pope, before the plaster hit his head, was saying it's a good thing for the young people to have their voice and go out there and say these things. But the truth of the matter is, this was an anti-NRA moment that the left was seizing to make it look like a groundswell of youth in order to get the midterm vote up from youth, because they want to get the power back. The other fact you got to know is that they're talking about the NRA lobbying and the money that they're putting out there. Now, here's the reality. The NRA contributes, like $1.5 million or something towards candidates, and they are not buying votes. They are endorsing people that have the Second Amendment message that they're running to office with. But here's the key. That $1.5 million or $2 million that comes from the NRA to candidates is dwarfed by the $500 million that comes in through Democrat unions to their candidates. In other words, nobody talks about the union funding of Democrat candidates. The big buzz is on the lobbying of the NRA in politics and politicians getting bought for their votes. The truth is, it's dwarfed. The amount of money the NRA contributes is, like I said, 1.5 million, 2 million, compared to like 500 million. And they're not buying votes. They're getting behind the candidates whose values are Second Amendment values. The real issue on the left that we're always suspicious of, and I've never trusted, ever since I got involved with realizing that the kingdom of God as a Christian is not just in church. It touches all of life. I became aware of the fact that no matter what the left does, is they always start with what looks like a reasonable, starting point, but their end game is total power and assimilation. When the homosexual debate was coming out in the 90s and in the turn of the century, year 2000, as that was happening, the statement that was made from the gay activists was, all that we want is to be able to be not persecuted and to be able to come out of the closet. And it sounded reasonable enough, but then you find out later it's not about that at all. It's about same-sex marriage. It's not about even same-sex marriage. It's going to be about gender. It's going to be about transgender issues. It's going to be about bathroom bills, because this is the nature of the left. It starts with a handgun, but it actually wants to go after the taking of guns. This is the way socialism actually works. Now, former Supreme Court Justice Stevens comes right out of the closet and says, I think we ought to repeal the Second Amendment. And right away, everybody's piling on him saying, shut up. You know why? Because he's simply saying what the left ultimately wants to do. They want to take away, they think the solution to gun violence is to take away everybody's guns. The problem is the people that are bad will still have the guns. And as you can see from the left, as incendiary as this comment is, do you know how much of the crime, what percentage of crime is done by illegal immigrants that the left wants to be voted, have built into their voter base? So, and I've given you the data on this, the statistics on the homicide rate, the drug incidents that comes from illegal gangs and illegal immigration. So Justice Stevens has done a gift for us, and he is actually outing the left on what their ultimate agenda is. Laura Ingraham, in the meantime, as you might have been aware, gets caught up in her own kerfuffle because while she was the first person to put David Hogg on television to do an interview, she goes back and makes a tweet about the fact that, he's whining, she says, about the fact that there was these 4 colleges that wouldn't accept him. Now, I'm wondering why. It could be, and nobody's even going down this rabbit hole. But it could be because even though he's got the high GPA, that because of the pressure on universities, they are taking in students that might not have the same GPA, but they're representing a greater distribution of minority interests. And so now as a white kid, he's discovering that you don't go to college based on merit because that's the nature of a socialist system. It's not about merit. It's about equalizing everything. So his response, which is so typical of how the left plays brass-knuckled, winner-take-all politics. This young man, by the way, is being handled and being groomed, and he's got advisors. So he comes back with the classic way the left does this. They're going to put the baker out of business. They're going to put the photographer out of business. They're going to shut down the chapel. Remember, that's just the LGBT agenda. Then over here, here's what he says. He says, here's the Laura Ingraham advertisers. This is like the 3rd or 4th time in the last 18 months that I've seen the left go to gut the business. They did this with O'Reilly. They did it with Glenn Beck. They tried to do it with Rush Limbaugh. And so they list here. So David Hogg says, here's the Laura Ingraham advertisers. And he gives you the list of who they are. So they're all getting the bot attack right now from how can you support Laura Ingraham? You need to pull your advertising. So they start pulling their advertising, and this is how the left shuts down freedom of speech. They go after the advertisers. And but I remember when they did this, and it backfired on them. Remember when they tried to do it with Sean Hannity? And so Hannity's response was, and he was nervous. I mean, I saw that guy sweating bullets. You could see it in real live time. The advertising, you pull the advertising away. Remember this, media is a business. And so the advertisers are actually funding the business of media. So he had the Keurig response. Remember, he had a whole bunch of people were taking their Keurigs and breaking them and smashing them. And that's the only way you can fight back. You have to actually isolate the advertisers who waffle on you, who give in to the political, totalitarian shutdown of free speech. And when they pull their advertising, you and I have actually got to isolate who they are and then make a counter media event about how we're, smashing Keurigs. Well, after that started happening, Keurig backed up and said, wait a second, we're reconsidering the whole matter. And the thing died down. Hannity survives. Did you remember what they did with the Duck Dynasty? This is one case where the Christians actually responded. And curiously enough, it's like the Roseanne Barr ratings with 18 million views on the revival of her show. See, the Duck Dynasty, or the Roseannes, they actually represent the core of the Democratic middle America. This is the red state stuff. And so the Duck Dynasty viewers, when they heard that there was going to be they were going to have some of the key actors taken off the show as a political statement. There was 1 million people responding to boycott A&E following the Duck Dynasty star suspension of Phil Robertson. So A&E then immediately retracts and says, the president of A&E says, oh, that was a mistake. We didn't really mean what you heard us say. And so they back down. And I'm sorry to say, you and I have got to be prepared to actually get engaged with this stuff. When an advertiser pulls their support from somebody who's speaking what you believe is freedom of speech, and you concur with what they're saying, you need to let the advertisers also know there's a consequence for them getting involved with politics. They should simply be business and stay out of the manipulation of the left. Well, while we're on the subject of manipulation of the left, It's news now that not quite as important to CNN as Stormy Daniels, but the nuclear North Korea. Suddenly, Kim Jong-un has a meeting with China, the Chinese president, and this is their first official meeting that they've had. And what's interesting to me is I wanted to see how this event was being played and why it's happening now. This is like the news behind the news here. What was being played in the China media was different than what was being played in North Korea. In North Korea, this picture was public. And it's a picture of, the toasting and the welcoming of the strategic partner, North Korea, to China. This picture, however, was not shown in China. And that should tell you something. It tells you that President Xi, right here, is meeting with Kim Jong-un, and there is a high-level agreement coming about in terms of what Kim Jong-un is going to do regarding North Korea. Now, there's two things that are happening here that I think are worth speculating on. Why is it that he's coming in there for a meeting now? It's because China has got to approve what North Korea is going to do with Donald Trump. Because China, in spite of its bluster and its muscle flexing in the Asia-Pacific Rim, is in a vulnerable financial situation. America's got like 3 years with Donald Trump to be able to create some kind of economic parity regarding trade. China cannot afford to get into a trade war with the U.S. because unlike the U.S., where our economy is moving up, and we would be hit bad if China was to suddenly get into a trade war with us, the difference is they think Donald Trump's nutty enough to actually push the trade war button. And they cannot afford it because they have they got 1 billion people under a communist system, which means that 1 billion people cannot have an interruption of their financial lifestyle because there could be uprisings going on there. So China, it'll be interesting to see what Kim Jong-un comes out with, because China is now approving the negotiating policy, and they want the policy to be such that it doesn't have a negative outcome for China in the region regarding trade with the U.S. So the other factor that's going on here is Trump playing chess. He dismisses his security advisor and Rex Tillerson, and puts in, of all people, Bolton. Now, when John Bolton gets put in as a national security advisor, the left says it's time to panic. Why? Because this is Trump, the chess player. Bolton is one of the few high-level advisors who has actually said we should get out of the United Nations. And by the way, he's one of the few advisors that ever went on record as saying, in the event that North Korea becomes a nuclear threat to the United States, it would be justified for a preemptive attack. You talk about ultimate war hawk diplomacy. Bolton is on record as already saying we should be preemptive, where if Iran or North Korea get to the point where they can become a nuclear threat to the United States, before that happens, we should utilize our military surgically to deal with the threat. Now, don't think China doesn't know who Bolton is. Don't think North Korea doesn't know who Bolton is. Don't think for a minute Trump doesn't know that they know who Bolton is. That's why he made the move he did right now. Make sense? So he's basically saying, I've got a war concierge right here talking to me. So are we going to solve this problem, or where are we going to go? That's why China and North Korea are having a private meeting right now. Meanwhile, final thought here on the domestic front. This could be totally bypassing you because the midterms are coming up, my friend. And the midterms, my big concern for the Christian world is that most Christians are thinking presidential politics. That's it. Well, do you think Trump will get elected a second term? It doesn't matter. The next election is coming up like in November. It's coming up like in a matter of 8 or 9 months. The presidential election is about to happen, not in 2020. If Donald Trump doesn't retain control of Congress or the Senate, then the lockstep agenda of the left is to impeach this president, to pull him out of office, to try to thwart his legitimacy as a president. And that's where they're going. The Mueller investigation is off the rails right now. And it makes me so frustrated to listen to the right wing, rhinos like Lindsay. They're waffling back and forth all the time. They've got to know what you and I know, and that is that the special counsel's job in an investigation is to find a crime. And you don't put a special counsel, they always do. Their job is to find something they could charge Trump with. So now they're going over financial dealings. Now they're going back into the archives. Now, in the meantime, while this is happening, there's exposure taking place on the deep state, CIA, FBI intrigue in truncating against Donald Trump's legitimacy by, now catch this, by spying on him. Remember, Trump said he was being spied on, and President Obama said he's crazy. Well, now we're finding out the Flynn recording that got him in so much trouble was actually done by the deep state combination of personalities that are now becoming exposed as a conspiracy within the FBI and the intelligence community in order to try to locate some dirt on Trump regarding Russia. And if they couldn't find it, they paid for a fake dossier. Paid for a fake dossier on Russia collusion so they could present it to the courts and on that basis get a FISA warrant to be able to spy on American citizens. This is the first time that the central intelligence agencies that are supposed to serve the American people have been weaponized by a political party to take out their opponents. That's why that story is so hot, and it's going to get hotter before the midterms. But Tucker Carlson brings up a very important point. You guys ought to watch him any chance you get. Tucker says that what the liberals are actually up to right now is fighting for the census, so that the census is about to be taken of American citizens will include its non-citizens, its illegal citizens, its illegal immigrant citizens, so that they can be reflected in the districts. And you won't believe this, but Pete Vargas, who himself is an illegal immigrant representative of the argument for getting the votes of immigrants on the record. This is what the left wants to do. They want to be able to pick up 5 or 10 million new voters, whether they're American citizens or not. If they're in America, they're saying they should have a right. This is crazy, a right to vote. Can you imagine if we have Russians in America, that they would have a right to vote? Wouldn't that be the fair thing to say? But you can't. They don't want Russia involved. But you see, understand the hypocrisy of this is the left is interested in power. I'm going to give you the quote. I'm going to read it to you here because it's such a powerful Twitter quote from Tucker. This is from March 27. He says that progressives really cared about representative democracy. They'd be vigilant about preventing voter fraud. Instead, the left actively abets it. What progressives really care about is power. They hate the fact that you took some of theirs by voting for Donald Trump in 2016. They want it back by any means necessary. What Pete Vargas is saying is that the American Constitution makes provision for anybody to be able to have no taxation without representation, is what he's quoting, which means that if anybody's in the country, whether they're legal or not, they should be counted in the census. And on the basis of that census, there should be the districting of congressional districts and voting that would reflect the illegal immigrant population as well as the legal citizens of America. That's the state of American politics right now. So this is the Lance Wallnau Show. I'm giving you guys the update on the weekend review so that you can see from our prophetic perspective what the real battle is and what the truth is behind the headlines.